power, and the glory forever. Amen. All right, we're continuing in the gospel according to Mark. We're in chapter 7, and we're reading, today we're going to be reading verses 14 through 23. So, Jesus has been teaching and preaching, and then Jesus called to the crowd to come and hear. He said, "All of you listen and try to understand. It is not what goes into your body that defiles you. You are defiled by what comes from your heart." Then Jesus went into a house to get away from the crowd, and his disciples followed him and asked him what he meant by the parable that he had just used. "Don't you understand either?" he asked. "Can't you see the food you put into your body cannot defile you? Food doesn't go into your heart, only passes through your stomach and then goes into the sewer." By saying this, he declared that every kind of food is acceptable in God's sight. And then he added, "It is what comes from inside that defiles you. For from within, out of a person's heart comes evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, wickedness, deceit, lustful desires, envy, slander, pride, and foolishness. All of these vile things come from within. They are what defile you." So there. How many of you know for a fact that you have an allergy to poison ivy? You guys have had poison ivy? Okay. How many of you know for a fact that you are not allergic to poison ivy? Oh, okay. All right. I have no idea, because I avoid anything that looks like poison ivy, which means I don't go into the woods ever. But I go occasionally. I don't bushwhack like I used to. But I think actually I probably might be okay. But everybody who knows anything about being out in the woods will always tell you to stay away from it, right? Don't take a chance. I just realized 15% of the population is not at all allergic to poison ivy. Because I was thinking, God, what is things like poison ivy good for? I mean, legit, what's it good for? And then I find out the berries feed the birds and other animals all winter long. I was like, oh, that's nice. I was actually reading on a survivalist website that he eats poison ivy. And there was a big statement, "Do not do this for entertainment purposes only." Because they have to say that now so that someone doesn't block them or they get taken off of social media. But this guy was saying that if you don't have an allergy to it, you can eat all of it. And I was like, that's insane. So I went out and I started, no, I didn't. I am not going to try. I have no desire to find out if I'm allergic, because there's probably plenty of other things. If I have to eat it, I can eat it, besides poison ivy. But, and sumac. There's a poison sumac. You guys know this, right? There's a poison sumac and there's a good sumac. But the good sumac has the red berries that you're supposed to be able to make lemonade out of. Who knew? I've been cutting this stuff down, cursing it every summer in my life, and now I'm like, oh man, the berries are just delicious. So I'm going to be harvesting this stuff, because I got a million of them, and making lemonade. I'll have it here, First Church. I'm not going to make any promises on that. But then there's the poison sumac that looks very similar to that. So you have to be really careful. Any of you guys lactose intolerant? Any of you onion intolerant? Yeah, I can't do onions, But I find, and I always thought onions were evil. I always thought poison ivy was evil. But guess what? They're not. You know that everything God made is kind of good? There's a good purpose. Do you know drugs, even opioids, have a good purpose? You see, it's not what you take in. It's not the drugs or the alcohol or the food or whatever. It's how we respond to that stuff. You see, because some of us can't do opioids because we have this intolerance. We have an addiction disorder. And and people will go to the hospital, it's like, you cannot give me that. Anything but that. And other people, it's like, man, load me up, because I'm in pain. And then they walk away from it, and it's fine. Everything's fine, because they don't have that within them. You see, each of us have this thing called a sin nature. And the probably the most fundamental, basic way I can describe that is this just selfishness. Self-serving selfishness. But it always displays itself in different ways in each of us. We have a desire to serve ourselves. Do you realize that our human nature desires to be its own God? I want to be lauded, not by you, because, I'm not that arrogant, but I want to be lauded by myself. You see, I want to make my own decisions. I want to be responsible to me and no one else. And the problem is every time I've ever done that, which I do it a lot, it ends up catastrophic. It does not go well. It might go well for a little while, and I might be enjoying it for a little while because I'm getting my way. I love getting my way. I love winning arguments. Sweet, right? Arguing with someone and you win, it's like, oh yeah, that's right. I'm smarter than you. I may not be as attractive. I may not have your hair, but I got some wit. You know what I'm saying? I beat you. And then it always comes back. I always feel like really badly. And then I have to go to somebody and apologize because I said something in my argument that because I wanted to win. I got heated, I got whatever, and then I have to come back and apologize. You see, because this is this thing that we have inside of us that's a sin nature. So it's not so much if you're eating, it's how much you eat, it's what you eat. Some things that you eat are fine, some things you drink are fine, and other things aren't. And it's like, but there's something in us that is broken. And all of us, so we're all the same, but we're different, right? Because the things that affect me don't necessarily affect you. But we're all still broken. Just because you don't have an opioid addiction issue or a drug addiction issue, or maybe you don't have that addiction, the addictive personality, sometimes they call it, a disorder, doesn't make you better. It just makes you different. Because I promise you, you got something else going on. I know some people who were highly, how should I say it? I was going to say religious, but then that makes it, they're really good Christians. I mean, they just live really well. And you would think like, man, I can never be that good. And then you really get to know them. And you're like, oh, geez, I didn't realize the guy was such a doofus. Man, do you see him? Oh my gosh, and here I thought he was a good Christian. I am so disappointed. The pastor, oh my gosh, a man of God? And he said, gosh? Or whatever, you know what I'm saying? It's just always something. Because you find out as you get to know people, and this is why some people really don't want to get to know people at church. I just want to be on the surface, just come in, do my thing, and leave, because I really don't want to get to know people, because I know when I get to know those people, I'm going to be disappointed. And they're going to get to know me, and they're going to be woefully disappointed. Like, no, that's not what it's about. See, our Christian faith, this thing, as we're living life, and we learn as we grow. That's why it's called a journey. It's because while we're on this path of life, there are going to be things that we stumble on and we had no idea. What was it, 2 nights ago? When was it that Michael was over? Was it 2 nights ago? Anyway, a friend, we had a coworker of hers come over, and it was dark, and I was walking from the garage back on it, and there's this log that my son left on the deck, and I hit my bare foot on. Boom. Ow! And Megan's like, oh, I'm sorry, Daddy. But you handled that really well. And I was like, because I didn't, normally I guess I would say things that probably weren't appropriate or something. And I sat down, and I'm like, did anyone videotape that? You see, because everyone ever gets it, they always remember the bad things. They're not going to be, oh, yeah, well, look, I said something. You see that? I sat down without cursing. Huh? Look, see, I did it. No one's watching except for God, of course. I start thinking, Jesus, and in fairness, these religious folks, the Jewish folk, they've been taught all their lives that certain things were unclean. You go to Leviticus 11. You ever read Leviticus? It's a thick book. Regulation after regulation. And chapter 11 is all the animals and what you can and can't eat. Well, you can eat a hoofed animal, but it's got to be a split hoof. It can't be a complete split hoof because it's got to be something that don't chew its cud. It's got to have chewed cud, and then can't chew its cud too much. It's like, it's like, what? You're reading it, it's kind of like, yeah, you can eat insects, but only kind of insects that fly. You don't want the wings, except for the kind that have a knee that bounces. If it jumps and stuff like, you can eat those. It's like, that's so weird. And it's like, why do they have these rules? Like a pig I can kind of get because they had worms and all that kind of stuff, and it could be dangerous. But what's up with the rock badger? Whatever you do, don't eat a rock badger. I don't even know what a rock badger is, but I sense it's probably really delicious because it's telling me I shouldn't be eating it. I know pork's really delicious, and they weren't supposed to eat that. These are things that are unclean. And I started, my whole life I've been kind of curious about that. And I read recently this one theologian. He was saying, his name was Jacob Milgram, and he was talking about the fact that he believes part of it, and he's not trying to say it's all of it, but he believes that maybe part of it is that God is trying to get people to understand and to, what's the word? Is it control the human instinct to kill? Like if God is saying, okay, you can only kill this and you can kill that. This is all about sacrifice. It's all about food. It's all about what you can eat and you can't eat. And it's like humanity has this, we have this innate violent nature. And maybe part of what God was doing is saying, if I care this much about certain animals, maybe this is something, think how much more valuable life is with humans. I mean, I don't know if that's valid or not. I mean, I thought it was interesting because I thought, here's a guy who's pointing out the fact that we are violent people. And when we are disrespected, we want to get back at somebody. When someone cuts us off in traffic and flips us the bird, we want to definitively accelerate and double barrel those people, right? Because you want to be able to go up with both hands and use your knee to stir. You know what I mean? This is the kind of reaction that we have sometimes because we get what is called road rage, right? You see, because we don't want simply to reconcile with people. We want to get even with people. We want to get back at people. It's part of our nature. And so when we think of God, a lot of times we think of God as being the same way. He's kind of this violent God. He gets angry and he just wants to destroy certain things. And it has justified lots of horrible crimes in the past. And we have to understand that, does God ever use violence? Of course he does. Does he ever get angry? Of course he does. But is he an angry God? No, he's a loving God. And so when you think about our relationship with this loving God who has certain expectation and demands of us, we're like, well, wait a second. I thought you just loved us. Okay, now I got to be afraid of you that way? Like I got to be scared of you? And God's like, no. I don't want you scared of me. I don't want you to obey me because you're afraid that I'm going to come down and squash you. I want you to serve me because you love me. We have a relationship. But don't be fooled. It's kind of like Aslan in The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. It's like, the lion may be gentle, but don't be fooled. He is not tame. He is still a lion. And God is still God. And so when we come into this relationship and we partake of this table, there's this like, don't partake of it unworthily. Don't make a mockery out of the table. Don't misunderstand your faith. Our faith is always about trying to accomplish the will of God. And it goes against everything in us to do that. There has to be a transformation that takes place inside of our heart because it's from within that our defilement comes. And it doesn't mean that we're, we're all drugged up, or we're all a bunch of drunks, or, it doesn't mean that. It just simply means that the sin that we have is self-preserving, and it's selfish, and it wants its own way. And our response is going to be, at times, very inappropriate. And we have to be willing to surrender our will to God's will. Listen, there's a lot of gods out there, small g. But all of them were either created by God or created by us. And what I mean by that is, some people worship angels, some people worship demons, some people worship nature, all created by God. Some people worship stone images or graven images, and some people worship a theoretical thing that was created by them. Because what we want to do is we want to worship something that we can control. We want to worship something that agrees with us. And God's like, going back to the sacrificial system. Oh, this is not going to be easy. Because first of all, there is no power that you have over me. There is no sacrifice that you can make that requires me to forgive you. That's not how I function. I am God, and I forgive you because I love you and I'm full of grace and mercy. There is nothing that you can sacrifice that makes me obliged to you. There's nothing. So why do we do it? He's like, I want to share a meal with you. I want you to show that you value your relationship with me. But don't misunderstand, there was no sacrifice in Israel that allowed them to do something really dumb and then come and offer their biggest cow or bull or whatever it was, right? The biggest sheep. So for God to be able to say, oh, whew, okay, that's better. Because, man, I'm going to wipe you out. But I feel better now. No, it wasn't like that. He's like, listen, there's no sacrifice there that will forgive what they call a high-handed sin. That was something that you intentionally did. The only thing you can make sacrifices if you accidentally touch some dead carcass on the road or something. You kicked oh, God, no, I just touched something. Now I got to go sacrifice. I'm unclean. That's what you could sacrifice for. You went out and lied and cheated and stole and committed adultery and did all those kind of things. Yeah, no. You're doomed, right? No. King David cried out to God, and he said, please forgive me. King David, a man after God's own heart, man, he was a mess. Bathsheba's out there hanging out. He should be at work, but he's hanging out looking around. Hey, what's up? Oh, hello. And he did all kinds of crazy, right? And then it just snowballed after that. Bathsheba. Oh, man. You see, this is what we all deal with. We can look at other people and say, man, thank God I'm not like that. Man, we tend to compare ourselves with people who are similar or worse than us. That's what I like to do. But when we compare ourselves to Jesus, yeah, we fall way short. He's like, listen, I don't want you to compare. I want you to be in relationship with me. I want you to walk with me. And as you walk with me, I will teach you things. And I want you to learn and lean on me and nothing else. Sure, there's going to be people that come into your lives that are going to be encouraging and some that aren't. There's going to be teachers and friends and parents and grandparents and cousins and co-workers and people at church and all of those things that God will bring. And some of them are going to be a great blessing to you, and some of them God is going to use to challenge you greatly and to really test how committed you are to Him. Because it's all this process. And He allows these things into our lives to grow us. So my word to you this morning is have a heart that is surrendered to God. What does that mean? I can't sit up here and give you a definition because each one of us is going to be slightly different. but it's just being able to say, God, I just want your will above my own. Show me what that looks like, God. As I read scriptures, speak to me. As I walk through this life, as I'm driving and I'm listening to music, or my thoughts that are invading and my mind is going 100 miles an hour, God, invade my thoughts, invade my space, so that I will be conscious of you and looking to yield my life to you, because I promise you this, and I promise you wholeheartedly, he will never fail you, ever. That I can promise you. All right, let's pray. God, we